Great. Welcome everyone to this webinar on graduate degrees, in particular MBAs and the GRE and GMAT. Thank you very much for tuning in. I'm really pleased to have with me today two experts in the field of MBAs and GMAT in particular. We have Craig Cartier. Hello. And we have Bassam Beidas. Great. Craig, would you like to introduce yourself, explain why you're in this industry and what you're doing?
Sure. So Bassam and I are both MBAs. I started my career in telecom in the US. I came over and did some consulting work in Europe and then decided to do my MBA at ESADE in Barcelona. So a bit of a world tour, and I ended up in London, originally working for British Telecom as part of their MBA program. And what I found was, after doing all the work to figure out the whole process to apply for an MBA, all of the essays you have to write, working to prepare for the GMAT, I found some friends were going through the same process, and I just sort of originally was doing a bit of giving some advice to friends on essays and test prep, and basically that slowly has turned into doing a few clients on the side, and I just found that was something I really enjoyed. And at the same time, there was a lot of demand for, just a lot of people just interested in that process. So I eventually decided to jump into that full time. So I'm a full-time now GMAT and GRE / MBA application tutor.
Great, thank you. And Bassam, you went through the MBA process and decided not to become a tutor and a consultant. You've actually gone on into business. So do you want to explain what you ended up doing and how you got into doing what you do now?
Sure. So basically, before I did the MBA, I was a professional tennis player for a few years. I got injured, had to kind of pivot into a startup. And then I realized I kind of wanted to open some doors into other options, which is why I did the MBA at London Business School in the first place. And I guess similar to Craig, I remember the frustrations and kind of the whole journey and mission it is to get into business school. And so I've always kind of helped out people also on a friendly basis, but then I did it through UES more seriously. But then I kind of realized that I wanted something a little bit more stable in the business world, and I wanted a kind of different challenge, which is why I decided to apply to consulting firms. And today I'm working full-time at McKinsey. And so that was kind of always my goal pre-MBA, which is nice that I've ended up there. But at the same time, I'm still very passionate about helping people get into business school and helping them kind of navigate the whole application journey.
Great. Well, congratulations on getting into McKinsey. I'm sure that's the dream for many people who go through the MBA process. Okay, so today we're going to have a chat about these graduate degrees and MBAs in particular. It's just going to be an organic chat, no presentations or anything. So as I said at the beginning, feel free to ask questions in the Q&A box as we go, and we will ask them of our experts. My name is Jason, by the way. I'm the Director of UES Education, and we run courses for GMAT, and we help students apply to graduate degrees, and we can talk more about that at the end. But today, we're just going to have a chat about these various degrees. So first of all, since we're talking about MBAs, maybe we'll start with you, Bassam. Why do people apply for MBAs? I mean, you hear about this all the time, but what is so special about an MBA, and why do so many people still want to do them?
So I think to answer the question why people apply to an MBA, there are generally a couple of different reasons. Firstly, it's to often switch industries, or switch career path. So that could be an engineer who decides they want to get into banking, for example, or consulting, or a lawyer who decides they don't want to practice law anymore. I had a lot of classmates from medicine, law, engineering. It's also for people who want to further their kind of career opportunities on their current path. So for example, a lot of consultancies send their employees or analysts to do an MBA for 2 years and then come back as sponsored MBAs. And then finally, it's often for someone who wants to switch geographies. So for example, a lot of people who came to LBS with me, they came over from North America because they wanted to move to London for a few years, and start doing an MBA in the country you want to move to is often a very good kind of transition path. In terms of what it gives you, an MBA kind of gives you a very general business toolkit. It's not necessarily something that you couldn't learn online by yourself. but it does give you great kind of exposure to all areas of business and gives you some hands-on experience. Generally, a lot of the courses do offer a lot of hands-on type experiences. Maybe Craig can talk a little bit about that as well. But yeah, I think it's just a kind of general toolkit that it provides you that companies tend to find very valuable.
Yeah, Craig, do you want to add something to that about what you learned during the process of doing an MBA?
Well, even just jumping on what Bassam said, I mean, for me personally, I was working in Europe already, but I found it sort of difficult to fully leverage my American CV in Europe, and I felt like the MBA really gave me a better foothold in Europe. So that definitely fits me. Trying to just, I feel like it helped me get my career established in Europe. And yeah, definitely, as Bassam said, you're building a general skill set. Of course, a little bit of the MBA value will depend on the personality of the school you apply to. Where I went to SADE was very team focused, so all projects are done in teams, and I think that it's a common element of a lot of MBAs, obviously. But when I look back at my experience, I feel like I exited, just a better member of a team and kind of understanding the dynamics and how to make sure you're doing your part and how your part fits into the whole, and how, as a team, you can basically achieve more than individuals separately.
That's a really interesting point, because I think a lot of people just think about doing an MBA. They think, well, I've got to do an MBA in order to get into business somewhere or other. And maybe people don't appreciate, and I certainly don't appreciate the really big differences between those degree programs in different universities. So do you want to talk a little bit about how you go about finding the right place to do an MBA?
Yeah, sure. And maybe just building on that point I mentioned, I can kind of kick off and talk about personalities, and then Bassam, let you jump in after. What I found was, in my personal experience, I kind of felt like my analytical skills were pretty solid, and I was looking to round that out, so to speak, with a really team-focused program like ASADE. And frankly, a lot of MBAs are going to offer the same things, really working on your analytical skills, how you break down a business, some really core business courses like finance and economics. But at the same time, the emphasis might be different from school to school. So for example, University of Chicago is going to be a very quant heavy program, really drilling on your analytical skills. But at the same time, it's a very individualized program. And some of our students at ASADE did an exchange with University of Chicago, which was an amazing experience. But at the same time, they thought it was a bit strange because at our program, if you didn't understand something, you'd ask the person next to you, and you kind of work together to try to get somewhere. And it's very different at Chicago, where they're looking to see what you as an individual can know and really pushing your individual boundaries. So the school personality can be very different. I think one of the best things you can do is go to an MBA fair. Of course, it's hard to do in COVID times, but a lot of schools and fairs are going digital, and just see what schools have to say. They're obviously they're there to pitch themselves and talk about their personalities, so to speak. And a lot of places self-select in that respect. So if you have a school that's kind of known as a team type school, then you're going to have people that are looking for that experience going to a school like that, and vice versa. So that's what I would say, is try to get sign up to some MBA fairs and just try to get to know the schools as they present themselves. They'll give you a feel for what to expect later on.
Okay, it's a great tip. Bassam, what would you say the personality of LBS is like?
So I think it's a good question. I think it's usually defined by the makeup of the student body. So one major difference between a lot of the European schools and US schools is firstly the age of matriculation. So generally at the US schools, people end up applying there around 25, 26 with 3-4 years of work experience, whereas people in European schools end up, when I started at LBS when I was 30, and I was average age of the student body. And so I think that kind of 4 or 5 years can make a huge difference in kind of the personality of the student you're in class with, the experience that they're bringing, what sort of perspective they bring to the classroom. And on that point, with regards to perspective, a lot of the US schools are around 60 to 70% US students. And within those 30 to 40% US students, non-US students, a lot of them have lived in the US for several years. Whereas at LBS, I mean, we had something like 65 nationalities. You're paired you're broken down into different sections of 80 students where you take all your core classes. And they purposely kind of strategically break down the sections into different nationalities to ensure that you're constantly mixing with people from kind of different nationalities and industry backgrounds. So I think those 2 points really define what LBS is. It's a very international school, and it's a school where people bring very different experiences and come from different backgrounds.
Okay, that's really interesting. I think before we go on and talk about how you go about applying for these degrees and universities, well, maybe I just want to add in a little bit about the fact that there are obviously other master's programs and graduate programs that people can do. And one thing that's just sprung to mind as you guys have been talking is this idea of a mid-career program, which is offered at a number of places. In particular, we've helped students get into programs like Harvard's mid-career program, for which students tend to do the GRE, and we can talk more about that later. But the idea behind that was that it was for people who already had a profession and were already maybe at almost like middle management level, but wanted to swap careers entirely and get not only a really good degree, but also networks from within that university in order to go and change into a different profession entirely. Related to that, I wanted to ask, how important is that network that you build during your MBA? Craig.
Yeah, sure. I think it's immensely valuable. I think, and in fact, if I zoom back a little bit, I think some of the main values, at least in my personal experience from the MBA, is one, a change in mindset, changing the way you kind of think about problems, and the second is very much the network. So just for one example, I was thinking about doing an internship. My personal situation was a little bit complicated because I had a girlfriend in another country when I was doing the MBA, who's now my wife. So for a time, I was thinking about spending the summer in Poland, but then thinking about an internship. But basically, I got on the ball a little bit late when it came to the internship. But I had, a couple calls later, just a classmate of mine that knew somebody else who worked at Deutsche Telekom. And a couple of phone calls later, and I had an interview with their mobile wallet team, which is where I spent the summer in Bonn in Germany. So I think that's just one example, but I think now I'm utilizing the network of my classmates when I'm just thinking about if it might be a business problem that was facing when I worked for BT. Or if I had a startup idea, of which I had a couple, none off the ground yet, but just a little bit of banter about the things I ought to be thinking about, and I think that's just a real valuable resource to use, both the network that I had in school and then the wider business school network.
Right, interesting. And obviously, both of you did your undergraduates in the States, and sometimes something that frustrates me when I help students get into undergraduate degrees is this kind of fixation with big name universities because they think that's where they're going to build their contacts. And one thing I always say to students is, well, actually, you'll probably make most of your contacts that are important for your business future during your graduate degree. Do you think that's true? What do you think, Bassam?
Yeah, I mean, I think it definitely was the case for me, given my kind of situation at undergraduate. As a tennis player, I was kind of focused on that side of my career. I wasn't really thinking too much about going into business and building a network for that sort of future. But I mean, just kind of looking at it now, looking back, it's clear to me that the MBA is the networking opportunity. And a lot of the talk before you do an MBA is always about the network you're going to build. And I think one thing to single out related to that is that it's a very organic thing. I think people sometimes look at it like, oh, I'm going to have X amount of coffee chats per day, and I'm going to harass X amount of people until I've met the whole school. But it's really something that happens very organically. You end up kind of falling into the groups that you're naturally supposed to fall into. So for example, a lot of my closest friends from business school came from the football club because that's what I like to do. We were, you could kind of have a bond over that. And it happens very organically that those become your closest network from business school. And so I think that's one thing to keep in mind when thinking about the network you want to build and how you're going to build it as well.
Interesting. Okay, well, let's talk a little bit about applying for graduate degrees. Now, there's going to be a lot of similarities when you're applying for MBAs as there is for applying for other masters. And we've touched on one of them already, which is finding the right fit university and finding the personality of the university. But what other things, Craig, perhaps, since you're also involved in admissions consulting, what things do you think students should think about when they're trying to find the right fit graduate degree?
That's a good question. So I think that I think you need to find the right balance because a lot of schools are going to offer, frankly, a pretty similar experience, and you need to. It's going to be nuanced differences, and you need to try to figure out what's the best kind of balance and fit for you. One thing that Bassam didn't mention, which I think that Bassam, I hope you think it's fair for LBS. If you're looking to go into consulting, LBS is a great school for that. Asadi probably isn't a great school, at least. Well, of course we have I have some classmates that are now at BCG and Bain, but it's not the norm. Whereas I suppose that a good percentage of LBS do go into finance and consulting. So I think that having a little bit of the end in mind is important, but at the same time, you just need to be aware that your goals are likely going to change as you go through the experience. So I think it does make sense to think about where you want to be and what schools are likely going to push you towards that path, but at the same time, keeping an open mind. I think that's important. And when I talk about the overall fit, career is one of those things, but geography is another one. For me personally, I just was looking forward to spending a year and a half in Barcelona, which is a great city. And don't get me wrong, I live in London now. It's a great place too. But I think it's just finding that right mix for you.
Okay. And Bassam, in terms of what you had to go through to apply for LBS, what other sort of things did you have to think about? Obviously, the GMAT is going to come into that, and we'll talk about that in a moment. But what other things were involved in that application process?
Yeah, I think once you've narrowed down the kind of list of schools, the short list of schools you want to apply to, because you're always going to try and apply to 4 to 5 per round just to kind of cast a broad net, because it's quite hard and competitive to get into business schools. I think the first thing I did was research the schools, because you'll find that as you fill out the application, as you write your essays, you really want to tailor each application very closely to the school, the culture of the school, the academics, and understand how you can kind of, I wouldn't say tailor yourself to the school, but kind of tailor your story to what the school is kind of looking for. So for example, I spoke a little bit about how international LBS is. Those are the kind of things that I wanted to emphasize in my essays and my entire application. And that takes a lot of work, because it takes a lot of kind of going through all of the school's online materials. It takes going on to webinars and listening to what the school has to say about the clubs, the career options, etc. It takes talking to current students from different clubs that you might be interested in participating in. So it really takes a lot of legwork, but I think the people that do that properly really benefit from it when they fill out the application, because they have a lot of rich material to put into their essays. And I think admissions officers generally, they do see the effort that a student puts in, and they can tell when a student really gets to school. And it doesn't stop there, because once you're invited, hopefully, to interview for that school, you already have all the kind of legwork that you've done to talk about, to show your passion towards each school that you've applied to. So I think that upfront research is really valuable for the whole process.
If I could just add quickly to that, sure. Because I think you hit it right on, and I also think that it's so important to have a cohesive story. So as LBS is really international, of course you want to highlight the fact that that's what you're looking for, but these admissions officers who read essay after essay, they know the difference between somebody who just kind of slapped on I love an international profile versus someone who has, some real concrete examples of, why they feel that way. And it does seem to fit with the kind of job that they're looking for afterwards. And then when everything fits together, then, you just get a feeling of, okay, this person is right for the school.
Yeah, I would certainly concur with that. It's a very similar process at undergraduate level when you're trying to demonstrate to the universities that you really are a good fit for that university and that you've done your research and that you really want to go there. And like you said, Bassam, university officers, admissions officers can really tell when you've done that, when you really care and are passionate about that institution. There were two things that you mentioned, Bassam, which I'd like to touch more on. One is essays, because you're going to have to write essays in your application. And the other one is interviews. So let's start with essays. What sort of essays do you have to write when you're applying?
Yeah, so generally the essays are different to each school. And each school will have a certain number of essays with word limits, and they all kind of pick their essay question according to their personality. So for example, one of the most famous essay questions is Stanford's, which is what matters most to you and why. And I think it might even be the same for the undergraduate. You can correct me if I'm wrong, but it's one that students really struggle with because it's such an open-ended question, and everyone knows Stanford's reputation of being a school that's very focused on impact and looking for students that are going to kind of change the world. And so people end up writing this essay that doesn't often comes across as kind of not genuine because they're trying to mold themselves into the answer they think Stanford's looking for. But I'm kind of digressing here. That's just one example of the type of question they ask. Generally, there's kind of two types of essays. One is related to your career goals and why you want to do an MBA. And the other will be more focused maybe on why you're picking that school specifically. And so that's where the research for the kind of background research you've done comes in, whereas your professional goals essay is more about what you've done and how your story kind of ties into the MBA and how the MBA will propel you to those goals, basically.
Okay, and Craig, what about the interview side of things? Is that the norm when you're applying for graduate degrees?
Yeah, so almost just like applying for a job, there's various stages, and if they read your essays, which is typically the first stage, you'll be invited to the interview round. What we're seeing more and more of in the digital age, we're seeing more kind of first round Skype or Zoom interviews. I've just seen a few schools, including INSEAD, start with that, and that might even be something where even at the application stage, you're asked to give a 30-second response to a question or two. But in general, most of the stages would be you apply with your essays, and that's your first impression, if you will. And if you get through that round, you'll be invited to tour. Usually, it's an in-person interview at the school. Which is a good idea anyway, as long as it's practical, just to get a chance to tour the school, be there in person, meet people in person. But of course, there's what a lot of schools do is alumni interviews in different parts around the world if you're not able to actually go to the school in person.
Okay, great. Yeah, I imagine most interviews at the moment are taking place online.
Naturally.
Okay, so let's now tackle that really anxiety driving bit of any application, which is the standardized testing. Now, UES, we have a lot of experience with the undergraduates side of things, because in America you have the SAT and ACT, but we also deal a lot with GRE and GMAT. And it might be worth, first of all, breaking those two down for the audience and talking about what the difference is and when you might do one over the other. And then we can look at them individually. So the GR and GMAT are both entrance tests, standardized tests for entrance to graduate degrees, but the GMAT tends to be used more for business and finance masters, particularly in Europe and outside of the States. In the States, GRE is used quite a lot for entrance to general postgraduate degrees, like masters and PhDs. Craig, since you teach both of these and have done for quite a while, what would you say are the major differences between the GRE and GMAT?
Sure. So as you've touched on, obviously the one major difference is just what they're typically used for. But a lot of business schools are now accepting GREs as well. So it's important to keep in mind. A lot of business schools are giving them equal weight. It does depend on the school. So I know INSEAD, for example, would prefer the GMAT if it's possible to take. But I would say that's the exception rather than the rule. So it's obviously important to know the school that you're interested in before making a decision on this. But both exams generally test a quantitative portion and a verbal portion. But what they test specifically can be a little bit different. So actually, a lot of the math overlaps between GRE and GMAT. There's some very slight differences. So for example, on the GRE, you can use a calculator. On the GMAT, you can't. The GMAT has a question type, which is data sufficiency, where the question isn't solve the problem, it's do you have enough information to solve the problem? And that's a bit of a unique question type that anybody who started on their GMAT journey knows all too well. The verbal side is really where you see more of the differences. The GMAT has a question type called sentence correction, which is testing English grammar. The GRE does not have that, and they have a lot more questions that test vocabulary. That's probably the biggest difference between the two. A second, more slight difference is the GMAT has a few more questions that test logic on the verbal side. And then the GRE has some logic questions, but not quite as much. And both tests put quite a lot of weight on reading comprehension, reading a passage and then being asked questions about that passage and your comprehension of it. So that's it in a nutshell.
Okay. So the big differences are, it sounds like the GMAT tends to have, would it be right to categorize it as having harder quantitative side, harder math side?
Yeah, that's another good question. So typically, if you look at those two tests, if you, of course, it depends on your own individual strengths. So it's really an individual question. But broadly, the GRE tends to be a little bit harder on the verbal and is sort of a little bit better if you had the choice to take one test or the other for the program you're looking at. The GRE tends to be the test of choice for those who have a verbal strength. And as you say, Jason, the GMAT is more for those that have a quantitative strength. One reason is the fact that you can use a calculator on the GRE does make a difference. It's a very simple calculator, but it just keeps you from making those, small arithmetic errors. Another reason is the GMAT, one thing that I didn't touch on before is the GMAT is an adaptive test, which basically means if you get a question right, the probability that the next question the probability is greater that the next question will be harder. If you get a question wrong, it's the reverse, and you'll likely get to see an easier question. That's just a different test format than a lot of people are used to. And what it means is it's basically trying to get questions that are as difficult as you can handle, which really makes for, it can make for a stressful test because basically every question is just right at your level. It's really trying to push you to as difficult questions as you can handle. The GRE does not do that. It's section adaptive. So what that means is everybody takes the first section, which is 20 questions on the quant side. And then based on your performance on that section, you might get an easier section or a harder section. And so that sort of fits a little bit more into the kind of exams that people are used to. Yeah, as a general rule, GMAT is probably more suitable for those with a quantitative strength.
Okay, so where a student has the option for the programs they're looking at, the option to do either test, they should try and sit down and work out which test feels better for them, I guess. Bassam, obviously you took this test as well. You took the GMAT to get into LBS. You had a slight advantage in that you were already teaching standardized tests, I guess. But what did you do in order to try and maximize your chances on that? And how long did you end up preparing for?
Yeah, so I think the context from which I started was I hadn't, done math in almost 8 years, maybe. So I think that should give everyone hope that they can do well on the GMAT. But basically, I took around 3 months altogether before I took my first official test. I took the test once. I had an advantage in the sense that my verbal was already quite strong. I didn't need to do any sort of Grammar studying, I could kind of just practice the questions from the official materials, and that was enough for me. But for the quant side, I really had to work hard, and it really meant, like learning the really basic math, and then mastering the really basic math before I even thought about kind of tackling the GMAT structured questions. So that's why it kind of took me 3 months of concentrated studying. I would say that once the real movement is once you start looking at the official material and encountering things like the data sufficiency questions, structure of the GMAT questions, because then it becomes a completely different kind of experience and something that really takes a lot of exposure to become comfortable with. Because I mean, like Craig said, the data sufficiency questions in particular are really something that a lot of people struggle to wrap their heads around in terms of what am I actually being asked to do. So I think, yeah, I mean, it took me 3 months. Other people have had journeys, when you talk to people at business school about the application process, everyone, when they hear the word GMAT, they have PTSD, because a lot of people took it 3, 4, 5 times. And, when they got the score they wanted, they had a huge party. And that's how much of a kind of stressful experience it was for people. So your mileage may vary, I guess, in that sense.
Yeah, we often hear stories and get approached by people who are thinking at this stage they want to apply now for an MBA starting next year, and they need to get their GMAT score and they haven't started. And that fills us with quite a lot of dread, because it doesn't matter how good a teacher you are, you're not going to be able to get someone used to a test like this that quickly. It really takes a good few months. In your case, Bassam, you said 3 months. It's not unusual for people to take something like 6 months in order to do well on these tests, because it really comes down to a lot of practice in the end, and really understanding what it is the test is looking for, and kind of training your brain to recognize those patterns of questions and do them very quickly. Craig, when you're teaching people for the test, what would you say is like the number one key for success? How do you get someone to kind of get into that mindset and get their score up?
Well, when you asked that question, I immediately jumped to GMAT, and my thought is, like I mentioned, it's an adaptive test. I would say the number one key to success is get ready to take some punches, because of the nature of the test, because it's basically trying to find your level really quickly and give questions that are just out of reach for you, let's say. That means that no matter how good you are, it's going to push you to the the extent of your limits. And that means that you're probably going to miss quite a few questions, but that's okay. And you can still get a pretty good score, even missing, 10, 12, sometimes even 15 questions. The difference is the questions that you miss will be at quite a high level, so it actually doesn't impact your score that much. So I think that you just need to get used to that mentality, especially because it's just such a different format of test than people are used to. And get used to, waving the white flag when you're just in over your head on a question, moving on to the next one, and, seeing what you can do. On either test, though, to give a bit of a tip for those down the GRE path, Bassam used a word that I'd like to repeat, which is mastery, because that's really important. If you kind of get a concept like exponents, let's say, and you kind of, if you're a teacher, if you're using a tutor or teacher, you see a video online that kind of makes sense, that's great. That's the first step. But really, it doesn't matter if you know something unless you know it well enough to not make a mistake when it comes up on the test. And also not having to scratch your head for 30 seconds trying to remember that concept, because time is a factor in both tests. And that's it's something to get used to too. It's not just if you know how to do the problem, can you do it quickly enough where you're not sacrificing time?
Okay, great tips there. Okay, so given that it takes a good few months to master these tests, what is the sort of timeline for applying? So if you wanted to start an MBA or a graduate degree in September, when should you really start thinking about doing all these things for the application? Craig, feel free to jump in here.
Cool. Well, yeah, I'll give my view. Anyway, I think the one thing I would say is it's very individual. I think there might be, maybe there's some consultants out there, some, finance people, and or many other roles that are quant heavy, where you might not have the brushing up that another applicant might need on the math side. So I think, I would just take anything I say with a grain of salt. It is very individual. But from what I've seen, most people will need 3 to 6 months, sometimes more, but I think 3 to 6 months is a good timeline to budget your GMAT preparation. And then another good couple months, just kind of really thinking through your personal story, researching schools. And of course, there's going to be some overlap to this as well. Researching schools, thinking about your story and how you're going to tell it. And if you've done that properly, it makes going about the essay process a lot easier. So if you put all that together, we're talking probably, anywhere from 6 to 8 months ahead of time, ahead of the application deadlines. And most schools' sort of main application deadline would be just the turn of the year. So early January is where a lot of people apply. There are some later deadlines in March and June, but by the time you get to those deadlines, oftentimes a lot of the class is already full. So your chances just aren't as good when it comes to those later deadlines. So I would say be thinking about it in spring, ahead of the winter, ahead of the fall that you're looking to start business school would be the best approach, but it is very individual.
Okay, yeah, that sounds like the same sort of advice I would normally give anyone thinking about university at any stage is start early, at least, well, sometimes about a year or more in advance. So now is perhaps a good time for students to start thinking about their preparation in order to apply by the end of 2021 in order to start in 2022, I guess. Yes.
If that scares people who are still thinking 2021, I don't think it's impossible, but it's definitely time to get the ball rolling. And then, yeah, if you're thinking about it for 2022, this is you're ahead of the game.
I think to add to that, so the schools generally have 3 or 4 application rounds, they call them, depending on the school. So the first round is usually in September. The second round is around December. And then Craig mentioned around May, June, or March, April, May, June. And as Craig said, they start to fill the spots up in their class as they go along the rounds. And it gets more and more competitive. And you really don't want to be applying in round 3 because they always say, you need to have cured cancer or something to get in round 3 at a top school. So you want to avoid applying those rounds. But for me, for example, I knew I wanted to apply in round 1, which is in September. So I started the process in January for the GMAT, took the GMAT in April, and I was the type of person who didn't want to kind of multitask. I really wanted to just focus on the GMAT, get that out of the way, and then think about, okay, I'm going to do the school research. I'm going to think about my story. I'm going to start working on the essay portion of the application. And obviously, some people might feel more comfortable with multitasking, but for me, I really wanted to be able to focus on one piece of the puzzle at a time. So.
Okay, good tip. Okay, let's talk about some of the technical aspects of the tests. The questions that we always get asked about every test. First of all, what are they scored out of, and what is a good score? So Craig, you can correct me if I'm wrong. All of these tests have very strange scaling, but the GRE is scored out of 170. So between 130 and 170. Who knows how they came up with those scores? Yeah. And what about the GMAT? What is that scored out of?
GMAT is out of 800. And as you say, the GRE is out of 170. And that's you get a separate score for your quant and your verbal portion in the GRE. In the GMAT, they combine the 2 portions and you get 1 overall score out of 800. So that's how it's scored. What's a good score? I think that really depends on the school you're looking at. And I think to simplify it, I like to think of, if you can, try to, look at the schools. And as Bassam said, it's usually a good idea to apply to a range of schools. So you have a little bit of a fail-safe if your dream school doesn't work. But check out your schools. They'll publish their average GMAT score or their average GRE score, see what it is. And if you're above average, well, then you're giving yourself a bit of a head start when it comes to the essays. But keep in mind, it is an average, which means a lot of people actually are making it in below the average. But that does mean you want to have a really good story to support yourself. So that's a good place to start.
Okay.
I would also add that you also need to think about your personal situation. So, for example, I had a very weak GPA for my undergrad, so I knew that I would need to score strongly on the GMAT to kind of make up for that, right? Another thing is it's helpful to consider whether you're a business school minority. So for example, business school classes tend to be 60% male. If you're a female, you might have a little bit more leeway on the GMAT score. And at the same time, if you can still score above the average, that could be an even stronger point. So I think thinking about your personal situation is really important as well.
Great point.
That's a good point. And again, what we always say to people is that a low score doesn't mean that you won't get in. It might raise a few flags in your application, but it can be counted out by other things in your application. So testing isn't the beginning and the end of your application, but getting a high score is your first step through the door, if you like, when you're applying. But don't make the mistake of thinking that if you get 800 on your GMAT, which by the way is going to be very, very hard, that you're definitely in. That is not the case at all. And the same with getting 170 on your GRE. But typically when we help students applying for very elite universities, for the GRE, you might be looking at 160 and above, which is considered a very, very good score on the GRE. And for the GMAT, somewhere in the 700s is very good.
If I could just comment quickly on that, Jason. So I'm not sure what the LBS average is, probably somewhere around 720. But as you say, 700 is kind of a bar that a lot of top schools. Well, it's a good bar for when you think of what you need for a top school. But at the same time, keep in mind this is a step-by-step process, because for a lot of people, the first time they take the test, you might have a score even in the 500s on the GMAT, and that doesn't mean that 700 isn't achievable. What it means is you've got work to do, brushing up on your math, getting to know the test, understanding what a data sufficiency question is, and just how to navigate the strategy and the content of the test, and you can make some big gains. So just keep that in mind. It is a journey.
Great. Okay, well, I think we've covered most things that we probably wanted to talk about with degrees and with tests. If anyone's got any questions, feel free to pop some more in the Q&A and we will ask them. Craig or Bassam, is there anything that we should have talked about that you don't feel that we've covered?
I guess we kind of covered it, but I think I would like to add a little bit more regarding school selection. I think there are a couple of buckets you can think about when selecting schools. So the first one I would think about is the career. You can look at the school's career report and think about, if I know exactly what I want to do, will the school I'm applying to allow me to achieve that? So for example, Craig mentioned some schools might be good with consulting, with finance jobs. I want to look at the school's career report and understand if students from that school are getting those jobs. Another thing to think about is potentially location. Do I want to live in an urban location, or do I want to live in a rural location like where Stanford is, as opposed to Columbia, for example, or LBS, right? Or ESADE. Another thing I would point to is perhaps the student body. I spoke a little bit about the kind of international makeup of the student body. Perhaps the average age is something you might want to consider, whether, if I'm a 24-year-old applicant, perhaps I want to be with people around my average age as opposed to 30-year-old applicants who at LBS, often people are married with kids when they come to business school. And then finally, my personal academic interests. So again, Craig mentioned this, Chicago Booth is known for their economics professors or finance professors. If that's something I'm very interested in purely from an academic standpoint, then that's a school that I would apply to. Whereas other schools may have other things that they're famous for, like Northwestern Kellogg is very well known for its marketing. So I think there are a lot of things people need to consider before they apply to schools and think about what's a good fit for them.
Okay, that's a great tip. Okay, we do have a question here. One person has asked, is it worth getting a tutor? This is a great question to finish off with. Is it worth getting a tutor for the GMAT, or is using GMAT materials enough? Now, I do want to say that as an organization that helps people prepare for the GMAT through tuition and courses, we don't say to everyone that everyone must have tuition. That is not the case. There are plenty of people who can manage it on their own, but clearly many people do get tutors, and there is a good reason for that. Craig, I'm sure, will add more to this, but one of the really good reasons for getting a tutor or doing a course is because it will allow you to understand what you don't know. It will allow you to gain the skills and the techniques you need to go away and keep preparing on your own. The problem with standardized tests is that there's often a quick way or an easier way to do questions that you just don't know and will never know unless someone shows you. And that's a very good reason for getting a tutor to start that process of you understanding what you actually have to do in order to master the test. Do you want to add to that, Craig?
Yeah, well, I think it's a great point that, the fact is not everybody needs a tutor. And the fact is there's a lot of great resources out there, and books you can get that can definitely help. In my mind, a tutor really accelerates the process. To your point, Jason, a tutor can, maybe show you a different approach that you might not have thought of. But sometimes too, you might be just stumped on a question, and when you're working on your own, it might be hard to see through to what you should be taking away from, and a tutor can accelerate that process and in a big way. I also think the right tutor can help you organize your own self-study time, because let's face it, a tutor isn't a golden ticket, let's say, to a great GMAT score. You're still going to have to do a lot of studying on your own. You're going to have to put the time and thought in to make yourself just a better problem solver. But again, a right tutor can help you organize your time, kind of point out the things that you should be spending a bit more time on. And just, in all, accelerate your own self-study.
Great. And on that note, we are running, when I say we, UES in conjunction with Craig, will be running a GMAT course starting at the end of this month. Craig, do you want to just explain to everyone listening how that works and where we can sign up for it?
Yeah, absolutely. So we're kicking off the first of 2 weekends. So we've got it's a 2-weekend comprehensive GMAT GRE course. We're kicking that off Friday, which I believe is the 30th. Is that the 30th or 31st? That's
right. Yeah.
Yep. Cool. So kicking off Friday the 30th, which goes to 31st for a second. So by the way, I always tell my students, don't be afraid to count on your fingers if it calls for a GMAT problem. So the 30th through the 2nd, and then the following weekend, the first weekend in November, again, Friday to Monday. So it's a 32 hour total, total hours of instruction, comprehensive. We're going to go from A to Z, everything you need to know about GMAT and GRE. And it's just a great chance. I think there's 2 audiences that would especially benefit. One, it's anyone who's just starting out in their GMAT and GRE preparation. It's a great way to just kind of understand everything everything there is that you need to know. Of course, you're going to have to do a lot of studying afterwards to really reinforce those concepts. But then secondly, somebody who's kind of started the process, but maybe just not able to get over the hurdle they want to in terms of their GMAT score. This is just a great chance for you, even though you might have the basics down, make sure you've got everything you need to know covered from A to Z. And this might be a chance to kind of expose some holes that maybe you didn't think you had, and point out where you really need to focus to get over the bar. So really looking forward to the course.
Great, thanks, Greg, and we're looking forward to it too. Just for anyone listening, it's popped into the chat there. If you go to our website, which is ueseducation.com/GMAT-GRE-courses, or just go to our website and click on tuition and courses and scroll down and find the GMAT courses there. And that's where you can sign up. If anyone wants any more information about it, feel free to contact us afterwards. You can always go to ueseducation.com, click on contact us and drop us a message that way. You can also email me directly on jason@ueseducation.com. Great. So to finish off, I just want to say a big thank you to Craig and Bassam. They have a lot of experience in American education, both having gone to American colleges and both actually having been sports scholars. Craig, you ran track and field for Iowa State. Is that right?
I did, yeah. And I'm sure Bassam can attest to just, sports and university. It's a great experience. I know it's a little bit different world here in Europe where sports isn't quite as attached to the school, but had a lot of fun with it back home.
And Bassam, you were a tennis pro.
Yes, so I played tennis at Pepperdine University as well. And yeah, I mean, as Craig said, it's an incredible experience to play college sports. So I always try and advocate for young students who play a sport to try and go to the States to continue there.
Great. It's a whole other kettle of fish, but if anyone is interested in sports scholarships, that is also something else that we can help people with. So do get in touch with us on that front. But for now, I just want to say thank you again to Craig and Bassam, and hope to see some of you again soon. And feel free to get in touch with us if you have any questions. Thank you and goodbye.